Groons is way ahead of the game. My goodness, Groons. You've taken all the things we're supposed to arrive at organically, and you have nipped them all. Okay, hang on. So let's back up a second. Let's go back over to this guy, where game object states are in play, right? And let's talk about where the bug was introduced. So, when we refactored our when we refactored everything, we put this in the common domain. We want to make sure, first and foremost, because in theory this was working before, and as Groon says for this bug, it's that we're doing a static property here, and if we're creating two of these, even though they're called in play, that they're not actually the same object. So we have to do our own comparison. But if we're getting one from the server, and we are also instantiating one within our own app domain, they would in fact be different. Groon says, sorry, were those bugs intentional and you were to show debugging? Yeah, in a way. So the idea is to, I'm not going to say do things like sloppily, but you want to code, we're trying to code things with what we know so far. And as these bugs arise naturally, kind of go through the process of just really talking through why they came about. And looking at the ways to fix them properly versus the fast and the dirty, what's optimal, and then come back and refactor out those problems. Again, trying to go through the whole process. But for this one, a great example of that is we don't necessarily want, for where we are right now as far as learning, I think it's enough to know that where this bug got introduced was we placed game object states into our common project, and we're using these static properties. So, and we do this in order to get this kind of strongly typed behavior. Unfortunately, the object gets newed up on the server, the player, and the server creates its own game object states in order to create the player, then sends it across the wire, and then on the receiving side, this entirely other program then goes to its own game object states and tries to compare the two, and they're not the same thing. So something that wasn't a bug before, because we had everything inside of the same project, becomes one when we place things in two different physical locations. So when we get over to our render strategy and we get over to draw room, let's just see if doing toString, because in theory the toString for each should be the same. And this is the most basic way of looking into why you'd want to do your own comparisons, and also how to do them, how to do it manually, right? How to rely on what is actually the same between objects. So, and based on the coloring, we know this was actually a real enum, which is why this one should work regardless. That enum should always reduce down to its primitive type, and that should be correct. So, let's just try that. Build it first. do 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 do. I'm going to do Gary. Okay. So also here, Gary and Beth. So we have our players. Not quite perfect because Beth hasn't logged in yet. So we're starting to really start nip at how much work needs to go into a client-server relationship. We can gloss over a little bit of this, and I'll do quite a lot of it behind the scenes because it's not directly impacting our design patterns, mainly the singleton. But it's really good to note that when we're dealing with these connections, starting off with this bug, this idea that the server's creating things, we're creating things, and we need to be careful about how we compare them, how we share them, how we do anything with them, because we're talking about two different states that have to be compared carefully and have to be shared carefully. A great example of that is I'm getting all of the information about this room, whether the person's logged in, dead, or whatever. Groons asks, did I overwrite toString? So, let's stop all this. So here, I go to game object states. Wants to know if we override toString, and I should to take the guesswork out of it, because everything is an object. The suggestion is do something like this: public override toString, return name. Right? So this way we know what we're getting back when we call toString. No reason not to do it, so I'll throw it in there. But the leapfrog from this bug is definitely that we're getting back everything, and we want to double check our flyaway pattern. So a few weeks ago, inside of HiveMind, let's scroll up, we've got our world, and our world is a collection of rooms. It's defined by a sheet, and we see that world with things, right? So when a request comes in, we're going to query our world and send back the current state of the room that player is in, with everything that we know in that moment. And we scroll down here. So a great example is when we log in, we get the player by name. We create a new game response, and we say that if we couldn't find the player, say, hey, sorry, there's no player by that name. If we can find the player, then we go ahead and pass back the player we found, that the request was successful, and what the room content is for where they are. So that feels appropriate. Let's look into the next issue where on our receiving side, after we've done something, it looks like we don't have an object that we should. And that was going to be, I believe, in our display status bar. So free to set this guy set up our server, set up our thingamadoodle. So we get our Gary. It looks good. I'm still seeing Gary and Beth, right? So this little area here, we're going to look back at our hive mind and our where we've extended it for our server, and see if that's going to be a logical place to do some of our login handling. So we get test hammer, and we get a game response. So we automatically know that it got to the server, it got parsed, and it got sent back, and that all worked. And we've already logged in, so it skips over this block of code. And the game response was successful and the player is not null. So we've passed by kind of our gatekeepers. And we're going to set the player 1 instance to the player that came back. Well, here we have it. Our player that came back is null. So then when we try to draw our status bar with that player, we get our exception. So we want to come back in here and fix that. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So inside of our core, inside of our hive mind, and so while we're in here, let's take a look at the structure, just to kind of put a feather in our cap and think about it for later, that we're starting to do more with this class than we really want to. We're trying to handle logins and edge cases when all we want the hive mind to really be able to do is process commands. And it's not such a bad thing, except that when we start talking about all these exception handling and like assurances of integrity and all that, we're going to really start to pollute our hive mind with a lot of if-then checks and a lot of try-catches that really are ancillary to its sole job of taking in a request and executing a command. But, okay. So, inside of our response, which if we scroll up, we're just making a uninstantiated game response. And we come down to our get, and assuming that we have it, we go to send.process item, which is instead of our igame command. So we come into our player, and then inside of our base actor, we've got our process item. This all looks fine. We accept the item. We're calling actual implementation here, and then we're returning back a game response. So it looks fine. SUGamer06 says hola right back at you. Okay, so just to again to reiterate what's happening here is we've overridden a contract that says that anything that implements our game object has to also implement our igame command, and then we've put in another abstract method saying anything that implements our base actor must implement except item. So this is the way that we're using polymorphism to really take advantage of baking in functionality to our base actor that will actually be implemented in a derived class. And so I really think it's one of the best complex examples of polymorphism that will really allow you to slim down your code and honestly make some pretty neat stuff.